Hello, everybody. It is 8:32, and it's time to get going on this review. I'm sure people will bounce in and out. It looks like we have 6 people here, 5 people. People are coming and going. If you don't mind identifying who's here, I know that some of you may not be able to type, especially if you don't have a YouTube account and you're watching through your school email address, but at least then I can have an idea of who's available to answer some of my questions, because even though we're live streaming this, I would expect some participation here where I'm not just giving away answers, but that you guys kind of work to earn them by responding to the questions that I pose. So if you would, just in the comments, place your name if you're comfortable with that, either that or I guess you can just email me that you did participate, and it's just nice to know that. Logan is here. He can't answer because he's in the shower. Fantastic. Okay. So, my shirt combination color. I've got my purple shirt under my red Cornhuskers hoodie today, and it's creating a very nice complementary color pattern with my screen today. So, okay, ready to go? Number 1. What is the long-range plan for the Albany Congress? What did they hope to accomplish? Why did the King of England order the colonies to come together at Albany? And some of this stuff we've already taken care of, but it'll give us a chance to kind of allow those that are logging in late to catch up, and then also those of you that watch this on replay, it's a good chance to review it a second time. So question number 1, long-term objective of the Albany Congress, 1765, or excuse me, 1754. Yes, colonial unity. Pertaining to what, Alacer? Defend the colonies from the French. Yes, defend the colonies from the French during the French and Indian War. So that's exactly right. Okay, moving on to number 2. What was one issue that slowed the passage of the Declaration of Independence down? Okay, so we know that the colonies officially adopted independence on July 2nd. What was the issue that prevented it from being passed until 2 days later? Slavery, yes. Jefferson wanted to lay the responsibility of American slavery on the feet of the King of England. And we can deal with how just crazy and hypocritical that is, but also it was highly controversial in the southern colonies. Southern colonies would not adopt that if that was included. So hopefully you all have completed the Declaration of Independence worksheet. Just as a reminder, it's written in a 5-point essay format where we have an introduction, at least, which is the establishment of natural rights, that governments are created to protect rights, and that governments that don't protect people's natural rights can be altered or abolished by the citizens. And then the list of grievances is the evidence. It's supposed to act as proof that the king had violated the colonial rights. And then the final portion of the Declaration is the Declaration of Independence itself, where it holds that resolved, these states are and have a right to be free. And so very methodical, very much in line with the whole Enlightenment movement that was also taking place at the beginning of the 18th century. Okay, number 3. This is an easy one. Proclamation of 1763. What was its purpose? And I'm writing everybody's names down. I don't know if it would be a great idea if I had just called you out and was like, okay, Abby Jenkins, you answer this one. But Sina is going to help us keep the colonists from going west of the Appalachians to protect them from the Indians. Absolutely correct. Even though the French and Indian War, the Indians supported both the French and the British. They were forgotten in the treaty making that ended that conflict. They establish their power and their authority in the West by uprising against the British colonies in Pontiac's Rebellion, and the Parliament felt like it was only reasonable to protect the colonists because they couldn't afford to defend them by placing that line there. So very good. Next, what did the Boston Tea Party lead to? So I'm going to leave this one. I think I'll probably just go down the line here. And if you don't know, just say you don't know. Otherwise, we'll end up waiting for you. But I think in order to get everybody involved, I'll just kind of go down the list and then just a rotation. So Eliza's going to take this one, and that's perfectly fine. Yeah, the Boston Tea Party leads to the intolerable acts. Okay, very good. Okay, Katie, this one's for you. Why did the colonists object to the Stamp Act of 1765? What was their ultimate reason for objecting to that? What was the reason the colonists objected to the Stamp Act? And my next question will be for Nia. So we'll give Katie a minute or another few seconds here to consider what the objection to the Stamp Act was. And Nia, you can start thinking about your question, which was identifying as many of the 3 accomplishments of the First Continental Congress as you can. Okay, 3 major accomplishments of the Continental Congress. So I don't know, maybe Katie is stepped away from her computer. Maybe she doesn't have the ability to respond. No judgment on our part, but the question at hand here is why they objected to the Stamp Act. So somebody go ahead and answer that. Right, Logan, very good. This was an issue of violating their rights as Englishmen. Yes, and so this was one of those longstanding English rights to be represented in Parliament when it came to taxation. You guys might remember all the way back to the Magna Carta in 1215. One of the very first rights of Englishmen was protection from taxation without representation. So, okay, Nia, when you're ready, we would like to identify as many of the accomplishments of the First Continental Congress as you can recall. We're looking for 3. And then Sina, I want you to describe what republicanism is. Okay, a few features of republicanism, which was a value or a virtue that was really championed during the Age of Enlightenment. Okay, so Nia, are you hopefully you're with me? Okay, so we're getting the First and Second Continental Congresses confused. The First Continental Congress was a response to the Intolerable Acts, and so Washington isn't named general right off the bat. So we're thinking closer to 1774. Your second answer, they promised to help and aid one another. That's true in both cases. So the First Continental Congress, there is a mutual pact of aid, and that includes preparing for mutual defense. Think about this is a case where a timeline is valuable because the First Continental Congress has to happen. The drilling and preparing to go to defend one another has to happen before we get Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Bunker Hill. At that point, then the Second Continental Congress appoints George Washington as commander-in-chief. So there is that mutual pledge for assistance, the preparedness, the military drilling and things that will ultimately lead to Lexington and Concord. And Nia, your third option, looking for reconciliation, is a very important element of both First and Second Continental Congress. In the First Continental Congress, that reconciliation, that letter that's sent is called the Declaration of Rights. Okay. In the Second Continental Congress, it's the Olive Branch Petition. The one thing that we really just didn't identify here for the First Continental Congress, which was important, were the non-consumption, non-importation agreements, which is the continued boycott, not just in Massachusetts, but across 12 of the 13 colonies, which is really going to hit the English economy hard because the colonies constitute about a quarter of British production. Okay, so just, this is one of those things where having a sense of the timeline is important. It's one of the skills. I'm glad that in history, that's no longer the only skill that we're practicing. Okay, so Sina, if you're ready, we were looking for a a definition of republicanism. What is republicanism, both as a system of government, and then what does republicanism value in its leaders? All right, all citizens working towards a common goal. That's right. Putting aside private interests. I think it's funny that you use the word Trump's private interests. Yes, no pun intended, but something to think about. Selflessness, self-sufficiency, courage. The one person that exudes these Republican values that can bring the 13 colonies together is Nick Law. Yes. No, George Washington. Yeah. So the other part of republicanism, of course, is electing leaders that represent the interests of the people. When you guys get to government, hopefully you'll remember this conversation. We have a Republican government. We elect leaders to do the work for us. Okay. So since Nick Law just got here, I'm going to throw him the next question. Who was the Virginia delegate that first proposed the resolution for independence? We talked about 3 important Virginians. Nick, which was the one that proposed the resolution, went home to Virginia, got Virginia's House of Burgesses to propose it, brought it back to the Second Continental Congress, and officially made the proposal in June? And then I guess I also would like to ask, well, let's see here, Abby Jenkins, while Nick is reflecting on that, I want you to prepare kind of an understanding of what mercantilism is and who it's meant to benefit. So Nick, I'll give you a panel of options here as far as some important Virginians. Oh, you got it. Richard Henry Lee. I don't know how important his middle name is, but he is Richard Henry Lee from Virginia. I'm glad that you think so. Okay. Abby, I'm going to guess that you might need just a little bit more time while you think about what is mercantilism and who is it set up to benefit. Logan, it's your turn again as well. I want you to, Logan, kind of describe how the French and Indian War affected the relationship between colonial militias and British regular forces. And then is Katie Luters still are you able to respond, Katie? I'm going to take that as a no. Abby, are you able to reply? Yes, she is. All right, great. It's meant to benefit the mother country. In this case, England. It's a triangle of trade. Unfinished goods are shipped from colonies to the home country where they're finished and sold. And hopefully we can all identify that finished goods bring in more money than raw materials. So that's going to create a trade imbalance. It's going to, obviously, it's benefit the mother country more than it will the colonies. That isn't to say that our colonies didn't benefit from mercantilism. I mean, they had a built-in market. And so I can't say that I have a question for you tomorrow that gets into those particular nuances, it is important to keep those nuances in mind because it's complex. You know, we have to keep in mind that the colonies benefited from mercantilism, were content under mercantilism, thrived under mercantilism to the point where when England tried to exert its control after the French and Indian War, it caused backlash. It wasn't that they were struggling. In fact, life in the colonies was significantly better than it was back in London. All right, and Logan was asked the question, or to describe the relationship between British troops and colonial troops during the French and Indian War. And he's saying during the French and Indian War, the British forces treated the colonies as second class, demoted them down. Yes, George Washington was really frustrated that he was demoted from the position of colonel, had to be beneath British officers that he outranked. On the same token, we have to remember that the British were frustrated by American colonials who seemed to serve when it was convenient. They didn't have the kind of devoted dedication to the home country that they had anticipated. 20,000 British troops from England brought over to the colonies to defend them, and the colonies seemed to act as though this was an inconvenience to them. And so it was kind of the world turned upside down, as the song says in Hamilton. So where it just didn't seem to make sense in the old world order. There was a new world order developing in North America. Okay, moving on. Here, this is a pretty simple one. We'll go with Nia, if you're available. Ben Franklin in 1754 published a famous political cartoon of a snake. What was the purpose of that political cartoon of the snake? And then, Alaser, I would like you to tell me what the purpose of the olive branch petition was. And Sina, your question is going to be identifying the most significant action the Second Continental Congress took that unified the various sections of the colonies. This is my home office here, AKA our guest room. If you're wondering, it's pretty Spartan, pretty bare. I've got my TV above for watching football. I've got my double monitor set up here for grading APUSH essays while simultaneously looking at a rubric. Okay, here we go. Nia says that the purpose of Ben Franklin's cartoon was to remind the colonies they must join together or die. And it was definitely against France. Now, were the messages of the Albany Congress effective in the sense of, did they lead to greater colonial unity? That's a bonus there, Nia. Sorry to put you on the spot. Did the Albany Congress lead to greater colonial unity? $50-50, yes or no. did we see strong? Not really, question mark. And you are correct, not really. You know, just over half of the colonies turned out to the Albany Congress. While Ben Franklin was well-intentioned, and it also shows you how this guy who's going to be a big name at the falls short. That the one thing they can agree upon is they want to be left alone. Yeah, and so the Albany Congress is a great parallel. It's a great tool when you're talking about change during this time. If you're going for before and after, it shows you how attitudes are changing to go from 1754 to 1776. All right. That should have bought Elacer enough time to tell us about the Olive Branch Petition, brought to you by Pennsylvania's Quaker delegate to the Continental Congress, John Dickinson. And the name really does say it all. Elacer, if you're there, give me a sign. Oh, great. Final attempt by the colonists to avoid war. Absolutely right. Trying for peace and reconciliation, restoration of the rights of Englishmen, to basically go back to the way things had always been. All right. And then we had, I believe I had asked Sina, and there she is right away. Making George Washington, the Continental Army, commander of the Continental Army, was impactful because he wasn't from Massachusetts. He was from Virginia. Virginia is not only the most powerful colony in the South, it is the most powerful colony. And so Washington was very clear that this isn't a Massachusetts problem. This is a colonial issue, and that they must support one another. And at that point in his life, he could have kicked it easy back in Mount Vernon and been successful regardless of what was going on with Massachusetts. Yet he demonstrates that civic virtue by stepping into that leadership position. Okay. Katie Luters, are you there? Are you available to answer a question? So I've got Katie, Abby, and Logan will be the next to get questions. Abby, are you ready for a question? All right. It's not easy, but I know you can handle it. Why would the Battle of Lewisburg, okay, and I'll give you a hint as to what that is. The Battle of Lewisburg was a fort. The opening of the Lawrence River, okay, took place in 1748. So why would the Battle of Lewisburg ultimately anger American colonials? Okay, keeping in mind the ones that it angered the most came from the Massachusetts militia. All right, so think about that. Why would this Battle of Lewisburg ultimately anger American colonials? All right, that's the easiest way I can phrase it. Logan, I want you to give me 3 ways that colonials protested acts like the Stamp Act. Okay. I haven't heard from Katie yet. So Katie, when you get back, be sure you let me know so you can take your turn. Logan, what did the Quartering Act require of the colonials? And then Elacer, I'm going to give you another question here, which stretch our time out for those of you that are kind of trying to look. Okay, great. Logan's got the easy one there. So his question was, what was the Quartering Act? And he's responding, the colonies had to have barracks in their towns and supply their troops with housing, vacant or otherwise. And that's a good reference to a little factoid I had taught you, that in 1765, the first Quartering Act really did not take private property away from the colonies unless they failed to provide barracks. Places like New York failed to provide barracks, and so some acquisition of vacant property was taken. As part of the Intolerable Acts in 1774, the British Army in Boston really did kind of go into people's homes and take what they wanted, just sort of carte blanche. That really upset and was a big overstep of the rights of Englishmen. Abby is now ready to answer her question, which was, why were the colonists outraged over the Battle of Louisburg? And she said, didn't the colonists feel entitled to lands west of the Appalachians? Yeah, I mean, this is part of the sense that in those early French and Indian wars, so this is before the 7 Years' War, the very last French and Indian War. This is like King William's War, Queen Anne's War. The colonists participated in those. In King William's War, they helped defeat the French at Louisburg. They captured that important little port to the St. Lawrence River, and yet it was given back to France at the end of the conflict. So very good. Logan, I think I threw out 2 questions at you at once, didn't I? Sorry about that. I need somebody else then to tell me like 3 ways that the colonists protested against acts like the Stamp Act and the Townsend Acts. What were 3 major ways that they protested those particular laws? And then Elacer, if you're still with us, I'm going to come to you next with this question. I want you to describe, I want you to profile what loyalists were like, economically, religiously, culturally, that kind of thing. So give me some details. Be prepared to give us some details over what characteristics defined those people that stayed loyal to England. All right, Abby's thrown out one good example of protest, harassing tax collectors. Yep. Non-consumption, non-importation, Nick Law, very good. I got to get you on my list here, Nick, because I keep skipping over you. Thought I'd forget. Yeah, and that was the most successful, right? Hit them in the money, hit them in the pocketbook, even though the colonies did not have representatives in the British Parliament. The business people they bought and sold to did. And so non-consumption, non-importation definitely sent a strong message. Other forms of colonial protest, obviously propaganda and petitions. That's kind of a soft answer. Confrontations that led to Boston Massacre. I would say Abby had it closer with kind of extra legal approaches with, harassment. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one and the same. Violence, that type of thing. But don't forget, the Sons of Liberty also published propaganda and information through the committees of correspondence. Don't forget that people replaced the goods they bought from England with homespun, homemade products. Instead of buying British fabrics, they created clothing from wool. And so I'm sure it was a hot and stinky decade as people wore their old woolen garments all year round. So good examples there. Okay, Elacer, we are ready to talk about the profile of loyalists when you're ready. And then Nick, I want you to come up with a few reasons why the various sections of the colonies, the three New England, Middle, Southern colonies, I want you to come up with maybe 3 or 4 reasons why they lacked colonial unity. Okay, reasons why we didn't see much colonial unity prior to the First Continental Congress, 1774. And Elacer, to his question, profiling the loyalists, he says, Anglican, absolutely. Right? Anglican members tended to be more loyalist, pretty vanilla, middle of the road as far as religious groups were concerned. Congregationalists in New England tended to be way more pro-patriot. Okay, so that's one example. We need others, though. And everybody can chime in at this point. Other features of loyalists. Sina, that's a good general statement. They had more going for them. I mean, think about most people that are conservative. Remember our rule of thumb, people that are comfortable don't want change. So what kinds of people tend to be comfortable? They tend to be wealthier. They tend to be more established as far as education, economics. They tend to be older, more educated. Yeah. From the South, absolutely. Yeah. So I think you guys have a good sense of that. Just remember the rule of thumb that people that are comfortable don't tend to want revolution, don't tend to look for change. It's a scary thought that someday you'll be old and conservative, or that someday I'll be old and conservative. Yeah. Okay. We're ready then. Yeah. I think originally Georgia was really preoccupied with Native American wars and very concerned about what would happen if the regime would change. Although, on the other hand, they were dealing with those issues while England was there, and that England didn't seem to be able to protect them from it. So it kind of went back and forth. Okay. I think I threw this one to Nick. We're looking to discuss why the colonies were so disjointed, why they were not unified prior to 1774. Okay, what are the things that prevented them from having a unified kind of unified kind of unity, I guess. Yeah. That's a tough one. It's big picture. Religious differences, very different economies. That's a good start. Yeah. Think about this. I'm trying to remember what the acronym is. I'll think of it here in a second, but there's got to be political, geographic, economic, which is like diplomacy, beliefs, diplomacy, geography, politics, individual values. The other P is peopling, migration, and the final one is economics. So think about some of those elements. We've got religion, which definitely deals with identity. Economics, we've got that, right? Very different economic systems. How about geography? Pretty simple. What about geography would keep people disjointed? How would geography limit unity? Okay, so you're getting back to Logan. That's a good effort there. You're talking though ultimately about economics, that geography shaped the economy of each region. But Sina hits it on the head there. You know, they're spread out. It makes it hard to meet because travel time, physical barriers, distance all create a very isolated America. And you think about when we were watching that video of John Adams, he's traveling from Boston to Philadelphia, which is like 230 miles. It's about the distance between, here and maybe Grand Island or Kearney. At any rate, it was going to take him almost 2 weeks to go that distance. I mean, that's a lifetime experience as opposed to just a semi-annual experience. So most people didn't go further than 15 miles from where they were born. And so, yeah, geography is really going to limit unity as well until we get to a breaking point in 1774. All righty. Before the end of the French and Indian War, how would you describe the British policy towards the colonial economy? Okay, so before the end of the French and Indian War, how did England deal with its navigation laws and the mercantile system? And I guess I didn't throw that to anyone. That's kind of a convoluted question. So I'll let you all work on that one. But before the end of the French and Indian War, what had been England's policy towards the American economies and enforcing its navigation laws? Basically controlling who they did business with. And then Nia, who is considered one of the founding mothers of the American Revolution. Really the only one we've talked about. Let's see if you'll remember her name. Sina's response to my question about economic policy before the end of the French and Indian War, you're talking about mercantilism. All goods going to and from the colonies could only be transported by British vessels. That's after. Before 1763. Okay. How had the American colonies been treated before the end of the war? Before the crap hits the fan, so to speak. There's a term we have for it. And actually, the colonies enjoyed it. Right. So, Sina, true or false? Before the end of the French and Indian War, navigation laws were pretty loosely enforced. True or false? Right. Yeah. Before the war came to an end and before British policy changed in 1763, navigation laws and whatever laws were on the books for colonial commerce were pretty loosely enforced. That's why we call it salutary neglect. You think about child neglect, that's a bad thing. Salutary neglect, that actually benefited the colonies. Mismanagement, right? It's like when a sub shows up. You're grateful for the salutary neglect. It's like, oh, the sub leaves us alone. We don't get anything done, but we like it that way, right? Okay. Sina, did you figure out who might be called a mother of the revolution? Abigail Adams is exactly right. The modern feminism movement really does look back to her as someone who dramatically shaped her husband's influence on the Continental Congresses and the building of our nation and his presidency. Okay, let's see here. True or false? George Washington was a brilliant military tactician. Tactician being strategizer. False is correct. You know, his ability to unite, his ability to lead, his personal civic virtue in his later years. All of that is what his legacy is about. But his military career pretty much is sub-average. He spends most of the American Revolution running away from the British as a distraction, trying to keep them as far away from Philadelphia, while the Continental Congress tried to establish good relationship with France. And that's what we'll talk about on Tuesday, is we're going to take a very limited amount of time to look at how we pulled this thing off. Okay. But George Washington, while indispensable, his military career was not what made him a legend. True or false? Most American colonials supported revolution from the beginning. Right. Yeah. This was something that had to be sold, right? This is something that had to be built. Logan says about 10%, and you're right. I mean, a very fringe element that originally supported a complete break with England. I see a question that I have to make some edits on for this before the test tomorrow, because it just is a bad question. Who was the Virginian that was selected to write the Declaration of Independence? Right. Yes, Thomas Jefferson. And really the reason, I mean, he was a Virginian and he was already recognized as a superb writer. He wrote this long treatise on the life of a Virginian farmer. And it's all about the rights and responsibilities. It's very much about how the best kind of person is a independent farmer who works the land and participates in his community and is educated. And so we'll talk more about that as we get into the Jefferson administration. But it's kind of interesting how he thought so highly of liberty, freedom, and the right to own land, and how that was all part of good republicanism, and yet he was a huge slave owner and was deeply in debt, and a lot of the values that he preached, he personally did not practice. Okay. Let's see here. I know that based on reading your introductions to the 2004 DBQ, Nia, you'll know the answer to this. Why did the British Parliament pass a Stamp Act? So what was their intention? Why would they do that, passing the Stamp Act? What was it designed to do? And that's a good note for all of us, that be sure when you look at a question, there's a big difference between intentions and consequences. What a person intends to do and what comes of those intentions are two different things. But in this case, what was the intention of the Stamp Act? Why was it passed? We're getting close, folks. We only have like 6 questions left. Yeah, perfect. Stamp Act was created to help fund for future defense of the colonies, pay for military defense. What became of France after what became of France in North America after the French and Indian War? Okay, what became of France in North America as a consequence of the French and Indian War? So really, this is about territories and boundaries. So I'll open that up to everyone. What became of France after the end of the French and Indian War? Their territories in North America. Yep. Pretty much eliminated from the, well, they were entirely eliminated from the North American continent. They retained some territory in the Caribbean, some sugar islands. Okay. And that stretches the British claim all the way west to the Mississippi River. And that becomes really confusing to think that the British Empire stretched all the way to the Mississippi River, and that becomes American territory after the Revolutionary War. And you know that France was eliminated from the North American territory. Then how did we buy the Louisiana Purchase from the French? We'll get to that when we get to Thomas Jefferson. Okay, but to this point, French and Indian War eliminates France from North America. Okay, eventually Napoleon will secretly buy that territory from the Spanish, and then he'll sell it to us when he realizes that Louisiana isn't going to be what he thought it was going to be. But hopefully that's all clear. Great. Okay. What were some benefits? Okay, let's identify some benefits of the mercantile system for the colonies. We don't get too single dimensioned here, one dimension. What are some benefits of the mercantile system for American colonies? Okay, we're moving in the right direction. I mean, so Logan, what you seem to be suggesting is that um, they had access to everything that England produced, and that's true. You know, they have access to whatever the British merchants would sell them, and that's great. Um, but how about as producers? What did the colonies have on their end? You know, if you're a tobacco farmer or a ship mast builder or um, let's say a rum distiller, you know, what benefit is there that to you that you're part of this merchant system? What benefit is there to the colonies? If I'm someone that makes a living off of making tobacco, yeah, absolutely, Nia, you got it. Like the colonies have a monopoly on selling to England. England is going to buy almost exclusively from its colonies, right? So you don't have to worry about England buying Spanish tobacco. You don't have to worry about England buying um, ship mass from the Netherlands. They're going to buy those things directly from their colonies that make them. So, in that regard, they had a built in market. Um, think about all of the artwork you've produced for your parents as you've grown up. And each and every time you make something, no matter how bad it is, they say, "Oh, thank you." And they put it up on the fridge. Uh, in that regard, you have a pretty dependable parent country. England, same thing. No matter whatever the colonies produced, England used it. Um, and so that's an important benefit. Another thing is England has the most powerful navy, right? In order to sail those goods across seas, you need protection. England's got the best protection. And so the colonies benefited from that. And so, oh, let's see if I'm missing anything else. Just keep in mind that there's a two-way street there. And a lot of people, as we saw with our debate, were reluctant to break away from England because economically the colonies had thrived thanks to those markets. Of course, people like John Hancock are going to tell you that England is smothering his trade because he can buy molasses or he can buy tea from the French or the Spanish for much cheaper. But what he doesn't realize is that all the goods that he does realize it, but what he doesn't care about is that all the goods he's hauling across the sea over to England, those prices are inflated because England will buy them since it's kind of a quid pro quo system. Okay. What was the purpose of the committees of correspondence? Sam Adams, Paul Revere. What did the committees of correspondence do? You want to know what one of the most useless things on earth is? A yellow pen. I'm trying to write notes here with a yellow pen on a white sheet of paper. And kind of see. Yeah, not good. There's no handouts here, Nick Law. This is not my property. It belongs to my kids, but I just feel like it should smell like banana. That's another reason it's a disappointment. It doesn't. Okay, Logan. Gained the support of the colonists against England and brought the colonies together. Yes, using what? The committees of correspondence were masters of what? There you go. Propaganda, writing, publishing, propaganda, notes, pamphlets, spreading information. And so, although most people wouldn't travel further than 15 miles, propaganda did. And that was a big part of why the First Continental Congress had 12 of 13 colonies represented there, and that the Second Continental Congress, all 13 were there, is that people were reading about what was going on through the lens of people like Sam Adams. So we might read it today and you guys would probably not be all that impressed. You'd be like, oh, this is old English and I'm bored with this, but it certainly was inflammatory and got people going. What's the difference between them and the Sons of Liberty? Not much. I mean, people like Sam Adams and Paul Revere were Sons of Liberty, but they also participated in the committees of correspondence. So the committees of correspondence, the definition of that was a network of newspaper publishers that published propaganda. Okay, so really their one focus was on the passage of information through the written or illustrated word. Okay, the Sons of Liberty, they published propaganda through the committees of correspondence, but they also did a bunch of other stuff like the Boston Tea Party, the burning of effigies of tax collectors, the harassment of tax collectors, public demonstrations, marches, protests. And so it's like there's this network of individuals. I guess, to use a modern day example, you might have people that identify with Antifa going and publishing something on, I don't know, 4chan or 8chan or something like that, where you have crossover, right? Not everybody that is in Antifa goes on 4chan, but at the same time, I wouldn't put it past that a lot of people that are very active on 4chan have connections to some kind of movement. Make sense? Great question. Lots of good similarities there. Okay. We've got 2 questions left. During the Enlightenment, what ancient civilizations provided a model for democracy and republican systems of government? What 2 ancient civilizations provided models and really were the inspiration to many founding fathers for democracy and republicanism? Yay, world history. I see a Hofer world too. What? Both. The fastest responses came from graduates of Hofer's world history. I just want to point that out there. So those of you that were Lura and O'Connor kids, you may have known, you just didn't know as fast as the Hofer clan. One last question. Yeah, Nick, I know. That's why you were late. True or false? The Declaration of Independence sought reconciliation. True or false? The Declaration of Independence sought reconciliation with England. Abby, message retracted. Now, Abby, I do think it's important you kind of consider why you put true. You know, what is it that led you to have a mistake there? Because we've talked about several documents, and of course, we know all the way up until 1776, the effort had been towards reconciliation. In fact, the Second Continental Congress would pass the Olive Branch Petition before it would pass the Declaration of Independence. But at some point, 1775, the King of England declares the colonies in rebellion. He brands the Continental Congress as rebel traitor scum that will be killed for their actions, and they must then unite for independence. They have to hang together or they'll hang separately, right? And the Declaration of Independence, there's a lot to debate, including whether slavery is something they want to handle, whether they need to be unanimous in declaring independence. And so it takes a little bit of time, but the Declaration of Independence is stone cold committed to moving forward independently. For all of the high school essays that I receive, where you're supposed to make a claim and then support your position, like a persuasive essay, high school students, a lot of times, they want to ride the fence. They're kind of wishy-washy. They want to talk about both sides. The Declaration of Independence is a magnificent example of a persuasive essay. You have your claim, your evidence, your conclusion. There's no wishy-washy. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that the whole country, or 13 countries now, were behind independence. Okay? In fact, until about 1778, 79, a lot of the colonists hoped that things would end peacefully and they would be welcomed back into the arms of England. It's not going to be till the Battle of Saratoga, and we'll talk about Saratoga on Tuesday, where the French join the cause. The Marquis de Lafayette convinces the King of France to support the American cause, and with the big push, the big boost of steroids that the French provide us, at that point, the war seems like it could be attainable and independence could work. And so, you know, there are going to be people fighting for the loyalist cause even after the final battle of the American Revolution. So we'll get to that on Tuesday. I am done with the test. Are there any questions that you guys have? I'm sitting at 1 hour and 14 minutes at this point. So I did a pretty good job trying to not take up your whole evening. You're welcome. I guess to evaluate best, we have to define what best means. If by best you mean that it appeals to a wide audience and does some things that no other musicals has done before, then Hamilton is the best because it's contemporary music, the brilliance of its choreography, and just the stagecraft and everything really does have mass appeal and is very novel in the spectrum of musicals that you could choose from. Oh, Hold on a second, guys. I don't know what just happened. Something with my computer. Elazer, I'm happy to do that. I mean, we did that. I offered it last year, and to be frank, you guys have been way better, way more dedicated. I mean, I've got 10 people here. I think last year my live streams averaged like 2 or 3. So Nia, you're asking how much do we need to know about the battles during the Revolutionary French and Indian War? You know, let's start with the French and Indian War. We talked a little bit about examples of battles that demonstrated why the colonials were so frustrated by British treaty making, and talked about the Battle of Louisbourg in that regard. But as far as other specific battles, really the French and Indian Wars were pretty uneventful. There were not like major victories, and ultimately France was willing to give up the continent in exchange for protection of its French sugar islands. And so, in that case, battles aren't that significant. As far as the American Revolution goes, we've talked about the cause and effect of Lexington and Concord. I briefly referenced Bunker Hill. But again, military history, while it's super interesting how creative human beings are at killing one another, unless it has like a major significance of this is what moved history forward, we're not going to take a bunch of time to study battle formations and casualties and all of that stuff. So, I more or less asked, I'd say 90% of the questions on the test in one form or another tonight. That's the best I can answer that. Hold on. I'm trying to catch up on what's being said here. So, Sina, what do you have on DVD? Oh, SpongeBob musical? You're welcome. SpongeBob SquarePants musical. Oh, I've heard about this, but I would have to see it. I'm a huge fan of the musical 1776, which is about the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, but it has an all-male cast with the exception of Abigail Adams, and the music, you guys would say, doesn't even compare. It's much more traditional kind of musical. Copy that DVD, send it as an APUSH graduation present. Oh, okay. Like, that's my job. I should give you an APUSH graduation gift. I see. That makes sense. How about you copy it and give it to me as an APUSH graduation present to me for getting you through this thing called your junior year? All right. Well, this has been a lovely hour and going on half. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I believe that this will benefit us both greatly, but it's time to call it a night. I'm going to finish watching a little bit of football, continue grading some of your essays. Don't forget to get those in, and I will see you on the flip side.